All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there, wherever you happen to be enjoying podcasts at the moment. Dan, one of your hosts here, no Nick or Brandon, but that's because it's a little bit of a Sam and Dan special. And you know what? There's no match to preview because it's during an international break. And so we put our heads together and decided we wanted to get back to doing some player deep dive, some player analysis on an individual level. We had done one of these before with Jorginho and tried to answer some questions about his fit into Chelsea at the time, what was right about him in terms of the things people would say, what were people incorrect about in terms of their observations about the player, and tried to really net out on what do they bring to the side? And we've selected another player this time, Sam, and he's a player on a lot of people's minds. And I think as Peter Drury put it on the commentary, City's boy is Chelsea's man. That's right. It is a deep dive on Cole Palmer, the recent call-up to the England senior side that we want to chat about today.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember you and I discussing about who we should do a fact or fiction on, and both of us settled on Conor Gallagher for good reason, because he's been absolutely stupendous as well. But just the penalties that he's been scoring, the contribution, just how incredibly amazing he looks on the pitch, it just forced us to pivot a little bit and say, you know what, he's been called up to the England senior squad. Give him his flowers. I think we should definitely discuss him before other people tap into it. And we definitely think that there's a lot to be discussed, because this is just the tip of the iceberg, to be very honest. Based on the games that I've seen before at Manchester City, I think there's a lot of it to suggest that there are parts of his game we haven't seen as yet either. So hopefully, fingers crossed, he continues to be better. And we're just celebrating a young talent coming to our club at a time when we need them the most. So super excited to do this.
Yeah, not only celebrating a young player who's getting their opportunity to play for Chelsea. Again, we've only seen 595 minutes in the league from Cole Palmer so far. So unlike other players maybe who've been progressing up through Cobham, who've been on the radar previously, or we've seen or had an opportunity to see more footage, there's still an unknown factor to Cole Palmer, which is why we're doing this. So we're going to get a little into his backstory about how he got into this point, how he got to Chelsea, some of the plaudits that he earned while he was at Manchester City and in Manchester City's developmental squad, the move to Chelsea, how it's gone so far, and then a ton of listener questions wanting to understand from a perspective of what is fact and what is fiction with Cole Palmer. So we got a ton that we're going to get into. Before we want to do that, we just want to say thank you to everybody who supports the podcast. 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Always appreciated, particularly, you're going to be in holiday gatherings potentially with friends, families, loved ones this year. Maybe they need a podcast to listen to. Maybe they need a podcast to review. Maybe they just have an account on Apple and you can grab their phone for 5 seconds and leave a 5-star review. We would appreciate it. You can also support the podcast by going to YouTube. You can subscribe and hit the bell icon to get notified when we drop new videos over there. Leave comments. Let us know. We're getting very, very close to 30,000 followers / subscribers there, and we super appreciate it. And you can go to Discord, and the link is in the description. Join our wonderful community there to learn a little bit more about what we're up to and engage in some of the wonderful conversation. And last but not least, you should also sign up to the CFC Dispatch, or the Chelsea London is Blue Dispatch that we do. And that is written by Sam, who had another absolute banger this week. He's like Cole Palmer on the penalties. The man don't miss with the writing that he does. And so, do that for Sam, first and foremost.
Yeah, Cole Palmer with the pen and CFCCentral with the pen. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's...
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Well, with that in mind, why don't we talk about the story, Mr. Author, and why don't you walk us through the bit of the maybe hero's journey that Cole Palmer has been on his way to getting to Chelsea?
Absolutely. But before I begin, Dan, I think there's a philosophical message that I want to send to everybody out there. Sometimes the universe gives you a bad experience, but it always balances it out with good ones. So I've heard of this place called Wythenshawe because that's the place where Anthony Taylor was born. So for the longest time, I was like, I associated it with bad energy. But Cole Palmer also comes from Wythenshawe, and suddenly the balance of the universe has been restored, and then good things have come from a place that I have not been to, but have had a little of nefarious energy in my mind for. So hopefully that dissipates in time, and hopefully I'll have good things to say about it. So yeah, comes from Manchester, is a Manchester boy, and he basically is of Kittian descent. So his dad comes from St. Kitts in the Caribbean. He joined the City U8s, and then he's basically progressed through the ranks very quickly before eventually captaining the under 18s. It's an interesting point here because midway through that journey, even though it was a meteoric rise for him, he was almost released a few years ago when he was at the end of his U16 season. And it had to be an intervention from Jason Wilcox, who was an academy director then. And he basically intervened and said that, no, he's one of those players that we definitely need to keep in the academy. And just before Pep Guardiola came, because you have to remember when he was playing for Manchester City, Guardiola wasn't even at City. Palmer himself was concerned that physically he was not up to it. He was always the smallest player throughout his time from the junior ranks up to the U18s, and he thought that it was going to basically hamper him when he went on to senior football. But his dad said, look, Pep Guardiola has been heavily linked. It's almost done. And he's never going to prioritize anything above technical quality, which obviously you have in spades. So don't worry about it. Make sure that you continue working on the fundamentals and you should be good to go. His coaches at Manchester City at this point in time, according to a lovely article in The Athletic, basically say that he's shy. He's extremely level-headed though, and he's sort of this character who still hangs around with his friends from school. And his parents are a very, very key influence because they've provided him with a very calm, very nurturing environment, which has been very beneficial for him. And I think that's contributed to the player that he's become. He helped City win the U18 Premier League Cup in the 1920 season, and he scored in that final against us. So again, we've seen these little moments in the past where a player's done very well against us and eventually comes to join us. So I think there's a nice poignant little universe guides you in the right direction sort of thing for us. But yeah, I should highlight that from this point onwards, he basically played in the U23 season, so which is the Premier League 2 season, and in the 2021 season he played 16 games and he managed an astonishing 13 goals and 6 assists. The season after that is when he started basically getting a little bit of look into the senior side, but he still managed to play 8. He scored 8 and assisted 4. Now, at this point in time, when he was being slowly bedded into training sessions with Guardiola's senior side, it's apparently David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne who helped him, guided him, and both of them helped him with the tactical aspect of playing as a number 8 in Guardiola's side. So they were instrumental, and Kyle Walker apparently was also a pretty big influence in the dressing room who helped him out in those initial days. Now, when this article was written by The Athletic, 25 days post, he made his debut for City on the 30th of September in 2020 against Burnley in the 4th round of the EFL Cup, and he would have to wait nearly a year to score his first senior goal in a 6-1 win against Wickham in another EFL tie. So 1 year of wait before he scored his goal. On the 16th of October in 2021, he came on as a stoppage time substitute against Burnley in the league. And then hours later, he went and played a game for the elite development squad against Leicester and scored a hat-trick. 2 days after that, he basically bagged his first Champions League goal in a 5-1 win over Club Brugge. And then he started in the UEFA Super Cup for City in Sevilla versus Sevilla, and then scored City's equalizer before they went on to win the game on penalties. This summer, he was part of the U21 Euro winning squad for England alongside Noni and Colville. And first game of the new season, he came on as a sub for Haaland in the Community Shield versus Arsenal, and then went on to score again. He's then moved on to us, fortunately, for a 47 million euro fee, which a lot of people were raising eyebrows at, saying, wow, he's not even made consistent starts, but how are you sort of paying that much money for him. Just to put it into context, he's already managed twice the starts for Chelsea that he managed for City over 2 seasons. So it's pretty interesting that was debated about. And in September, post Chelsea move, he basically captained the U21s in a 9-1 win over Serbia. So it's been up and down again. He's had some challenges. He's basically been through a lot, but it's also been very, very quick. I think it's very apparent that when he hits a setback, he bounces back very quickly, and how. And I think that's been very apparent in the initial impressions we have of him as a player.
It's interesting to look back in preparation for this episode at the reaction, particularly from City fans at the time the Palmer move was announced. And in general, there was sentiment that people were disappointed that he was leaving, that they thought he would actually, many comments suggested that they thought he would get more game time at City this year than he would get at Chelsea, which I think on current trajectory definitely would not have been the case. But again, we have the benefit of hindsight in this moment. People pointing out the fact that there were photos of the David Silva with the young Cole Palmer, and how the thought about him having any type of performance up to the level of David Silva over his time or tenure in world football and as a professional would be something very painful to lose on. There are people saying that maybe not the first best academy player, but maybe the second or third player in the academy that City has ever produced. People saying that they thought he would come on to be a star for us. People saying that they were happy with the amount that they got from him. Almost similar to things that we have said as Chelsea supporters when we have a talented youngster who doesn't necessarily feel like they have an opportunity to make it here. Again, whether or not we agree with that, in a like Lewis Hall type of situation is maybe a little kind of different, but where the player doesn't feel like they have the opportunity, supporters like the player, but are also aware of the business and the way that it works, that, millions, tens of millions of pounds for a player is a hard thing to say no to. And you also have to kind of keep the player interest in mind that they might want to leave and have an opportunity as much as you might value them. And so I think that thought has changed. Now they look at Cole and what he's done, and De Bruyne being out on extended injury. And who knows, maybe he would have gotten more opportunity this season at City with the way things that have played out. But you can't argue with the fact that at least at this moment in time, Chelsea feel like they have gotten the better part of the deal, whereas City, even with the dollars, might be missing someone like Cole in this exact moment.
Yeah, I would like to add two things here. One is, if there's something that I have grown increasingly convinced of, is the fact that you do not bet against Joe Shields. When this guy picks out a player, I sort of like follow his Instagram stories. I have stalked who he's following on Instagram as well. Apologies, Joe, if you're listening in. But just to figure out like his grip on players, and the ones that he sort of goes after, the ones that we're linked with in public, Osman Dioman, Lenny Yoro, all these guys who I've watched last season, he tends to pick out, the absolute creme de la creme, and in ways that I think he zones onto them very early, and he tends to do a very, very good job. I know that on this spot, I've been a pretty vocal critic of the Lavia deal, the amount of money we paid for him. We did this before he joined, and I said, it might not work out. Injury issues, logjam in midfield, don't know if he's good enough defensively. But the only reason, I would say one of the major reasons why I have faith in this deal is because of Joe Shields. And the moment he said, moment we knew that Palmer was coming here, I knew who was spearheading that deal and where it was coming from. And that gave me a lot of peace of mind to sit back and say, okay, we know what we're doing. And there is a person who has pretty good information about what this player is capable of, who he is as a person, and what he's capable of doing, or what his ceiling is. And that's what has sort of like been my barometer in those early days. And I think I would attribute it to the fantastic eye that Joe Shields has. So that would be the first point. And the second, like you said, I think it was opportunity meets, the window of like our transfer guys saying, look, there is a player here. we've got our first two choice central attacking midfielders out in Kunku and Chukwuemeka. Who do we want to go? Who's not just going to be, a liability once those two guys come back, but actually go on to challenge both of them in making that role his. And that's where it happened. When you talk about an opportunity for Manchester City to say, okay, Kevin De Bruyne is out. They sold Riyad Mahrez also. That's exactly what Pep said. His convincing point to Cole Palmer then is something that he mentioned pre the Chelsea City game in his conference. He said Cole arrived and accepted some processes, and then after 1 or 2 years said, I don't want to play here. I told him Riyad Mahrez is leaving. You're going to get a chance here. And he said, no, I'm not going to play here and I want to leave. So I said, okay, leave. And that's what Pep does. He's done this to multiple players. The moment he feels like that, commitment is not there, that you want to go and you've got 1 foot out of the door, he just says, just leave. And he says he got what he wanted. It is good for him. He's a young player, huge talent. Otherwise, he would not have been here. He's a nice lad, and it is good to see that he's doing really well. So I think that just came together for us. I think that opportunity was there for all of us to exploit. And I think initial assessment is that it was brilliantly done on our part to recognize that he could be the player if given the time to shine on the pitch.
That makes complete sense. And I know that Cole Palmer also had a chance to get his perspective out into the media, particularly around the City match, given that, of course, he was going to be a focal point of the conversation, given the recent move from Manchester to London. And he had to say, I was thinking about it for a couple of days, every minute of the day. I didn't know what to do. It was a really tough decision. And I thought for my career, I had to go and get regular game time, the competition that was at City, the players that were there, the players that were going to try to sign. So I wasn't sure. I looked at the Chelsea squad and thought, if I go there and know what I can do and then have the chance of playing, I will have the chance of playing. Thankfully, it's happened. And that, I think, speaks to the type of player who is comfortable shrugging off the penalty in a heated moment, in a absolutely crazy Premier League match between Manchester City and Chelsea. Ready for the moment, ready to know who he is, know his worth, know his ability to compete. And also, I think the difference between where Chelsea were at or Chelsea are still at in flux under new manager for the 100th time in the past 18 months, it feels like, and under new ownership, whereas City are very stable, and it's very much a addition of 1, addition a minus of 2, an addition of 1, very strategic squad building in the sense that they're not doing tons of overhaul the way that Chelsea are right now. And so I think I can understand Cole Palmer's perspective that he shared here, Sam, and ultimately leads me to the fact that we got someone who bet on himself to be able to make it into this side and is reaping the benefits of that self-belief.
I think we're seeing something similar to what happened to us with regards to certain talents as well. I think the player he was referencing here is Jeremy Doku, because I felt that Cole Palmer himself saw him like the opportunity for him to be very linear. If Kevin De Bruyne is out, if Bernardo Silva, for example, was ill, I think, on the day of the Super Cup, and that's why Palmer got the start. And he went on to score in that game. And I think he was really, really good. I saw the entire game twice. And the amount of stuff that he was showcasing on and off the ball, I think should have convinced the hierarchy to say, you've got a really good player on that right-hand side, so maybe you should be, hedging your bet there. But you also look at Pep's perspective that you see a talent and you identify that there's a window to get him. And obviously you could make him better. And Jeremy Doku, in terms of dribbling, I would say, is one of the best dribblers anywhere in the world. So I think City just said, okay, we need to stock up like we always do. And that just went on to backfire. And Palmer just said, look, not going to happen. I think they expected him to stay post Mahrez because they expected him to do something what Phil Foden did. He accepted a bench role, said, look, at 2021, I'm just going to ease myself and learn as much as I can until I'm trusted to take on that responsibility. But Palmer, like you said, I think has this great perception about where he is and where he wants to be. And he references in an interview that he spoke to Mauricio Pochettino on the phone. He knew that the manager has a great track record of improving players, younger players. He also spoke to Sterling, and I think that convinced him of the vision. So, yeah, young squad is learning, saw himself taking as many starts, probably twice as many starts as he would get at Manchester City's pep roulette or rotation. And yeah, I think he does not think. I mean, he himself says that he's convinced that it was the right decision to make.
Well, we appreciate it. And again, we appreciate the gifts too, in addition to a little bit, as Nick would call it, shithousery of jumping into the City huddle and having to have Erling Haaland push him out. Though it seemed as if that Erling Haaland thought it was funnier than the rest of the group in that exact moment. But look, we want to get into how his performances have looked so far, talk a little bit about the on the pitch, not just the antics, but also the performances, and then get into all of your wonderful listener questions. We're going to take our last break, and when we get back, we're going to get into all that. So stay tuned. All right, so Sam, on general, he's got some really good stats that we want to go through. I think you cherry-picked a couple here that you thought were not just great in terms of his individual performance, but just in the fact that in the top five in Europe, he actually has some pretty impressive elements there that are not just, individually in the Premier League, but actually in European football are really, really worth looking into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these were just numbers. It's a very small sample size, but again, I think we signed him on a very small sample size as well. So if you look at the numbers here, I think it's fair to make an assumption that these stats will be a good reflection of the performances that he will provide in the coming days and weeks and hopefully years. So 4 penalties obviously converted is the highest in the Premier League. It is also second in Europe's top 5 leagues. Now, his expected assisted goals per 90 minutes stands at 0.44, and that's third in the Premier League and 7th in Europe's top 5 leagues. He's also got 21 passes into the penalty area, which is 8th in the Premier League. And it's important to consider that this is not per 90 minutes. This is the overall tally, which means that we are not factoring in the fact that he missed, I think, 3 games. And then he's also made sub appearances in those minutes. Like you said, I think 500 something minutes. So he's obviously missed out on a bigger bounty. And passes into the penalty area, minimum 450 minutes of all the players in Europe's top 5 leagues. He stands at 9th, which is a pretty good number to be at. And obviously 8 through balls. I think some people, not some, but I think everybody's noticed that he's quite adept at playing these incisive balls from the right-hand side pocket to overlapping fullbacks or to Raheem Sterling running on to lose balls. And I think that 8 through balls metric is a pretty great number for the amount of games that he's played. It puts him 5th in the Premier League and 9th in Europe's top 5 league. So an accurate, I think, assessment of where his strengths are. Obviously, the penalties have got us some really good points. He's creating a lot of chances for players around him. He's also very incisive when it comes to getting the ball into the dangerous parts of the field. And I think it just highlights his strongest skill set as a whole.
So, yeah, I think when you look at some of those things, it gets pretty exciting when you look at how he's just slotted in and kind of contributed. He's definitely in the top 5 as relates to shot creating actions for Chelsea, behind Sterling, Fernandes, Gallagher, and Jackson. Not too far behind. He's at 29 in total on the 33 of Jackson and the 39 of Cole Gallagher. When you flip that to per 90, however, he does lead the side for shot creating actions per 90. That's right, ahead of Enzo Fernandez at 4.39. And I guess based upon what you've seen, the way that he plays, Sam, I guess I'm not surprised by that, because I do think we've seen a little bit of a dip in form at times from Enzo. Obviously is proud papa and has had some pretty long international travels as it relates to his games that he has to go to during a break. But also I think we're seeing Cole, necessarily in attack. You should have people, in the shot creating actions per 90 should be your attackers. It shouldn't necessarily be your midfielders.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want somebody in your attack. Like I mentioned this term quite a bit. You need an unifier in attack. you wouldn't have a very good, fully functional attack if somebody wasn't pulling the strings and actively looking to find players in the right spaces at the right time. And I think that's Palmer's biggest asset. He not just has the technical ability to pull difficult passes, but he also has a temporal understanding. He understands at what time to release it, which is the optimal moment to find that player in a position where he can take a touch and then finish it in a compulsive way. So when you have that kind of a player who's able to make the most out of a front line of Raheem Sterling, hopefully Christopher Nkunku, and hopefully an improving Nicholas Jackson, or an upgraded centre forward like Victor Osimhen or whoever that name is, then you look and say, okay, then you've got one player in that attacking line who's constantly looking to feed the others. And I think Palmer has cemented his place purely on the merit of that. That he's the most decisive influence in terms of improving everybody around him.
So out of his performances so far, I mean, he has gotten a couple of man of the match trophies from the Premier League for his performances. What would you say his best match has been?
Very strangely, I would probably say it was Manchester City, and this would probably stand even without the penalty that he scored to equalize the game. What I really liked about that performance was you saw him in difficult circumstances, mentally, physically, and you saw what he was offering even when he did not get the ball as much as he wanted to. He was constantly tracking back, dropping, making sure that Reece James did not have to deal 1v1 with Jeremy Doku or whoever that runner was on that flank. And there was this selfless industry, this constant determination to make sure that nothing went down his side. I think he prides himself on not making mistakes and then making sure that he's got everything on his flank locked down. And I think that's fantastic to see from a player of his age. So just to see what he was like without the ball, just to see the application, the understanding, I think these are all things that Pep consciously drills into your head as a player, because you have to be completely multifaceted. You have to be thorough with your tactical plans when you have the ball and when you don't. And you already see that in spades in Palmer. So I would say City was 100% the best performance, and that penalty at the end was the cherry on top.
It was a cherry on top, that's for certain. I may have a different view of it, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this. I actually feel like the most complete performance was the Tottenham match, and I know there's a lot of whatabouts with the Tottenham match. Oh, what about the fact it was against 9 players? Or what about the fact that, Tottenham were playing absolutely crazy and weren't necessarily doing anything to play an actual game of football or try to win the game? However, there was a goal, there was an assist. It was done with less touches, than some of the other performances that he's had, where he's been able to manage some of that. I thought that was good to see. He also got involved from like a tackle and interception perspective that I thought was really nice. Did create less kind of like shot creating actions, but had the kind of goal creating action, which comes from the assist. And so I liked seeing that element of his game. I mean, you could argue that he is owed more assists. I feel like that's a conversation we've had around a lot of players at Chelsea before. But, to me, it felt like a very complete performance as well. And maybe we're splitting hairs here because he's just that good so quick, or he slotted in that quick in a couple really big games and has maybe the institutional pedigree from his time as a bit of a youth champion or progressing in his time at City to know what it means to play the teams at the higher level who demand the respect of the performance you put out on the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very good performance, 100%. But me being the stickler for certain details, yeah, no, I think I've just gone with certain things. Like I think he struggled in that initial spell, and not because of any mistake of his. I think it was just tactically. What Spurs basically did was they kept pulling their fullbacks in. So essentially, it forced Palmer to mark 2 guys at the same time. He had to make sure the ball did not go in, but he also had to make sure the ball did not go directly to Brennan Johnson and allow him to go 1v1 with Reece James, which happened in the first 2 instances. And James Maddison, if you remember, was basically he dropped to Palmer's side, collected the ball, and shifted it to the other side. So I would say those 3 instances in the first 15 minutes where, just moments where he could have done better, but obviously you're looking at the system of it and saying, wow, that was tough to play against. But you also knew and you had to be prepared because you knew that Spurs do that every single game. So I think that was a great learning experience for him. And I didn't basically mark that as the best performance because of the first reason that you said. It was against a decreasing amount of Spurs players, so more space, more time to basically pick out. I was extremely impressed with the way that he reads the press, the way that he intercepts, the way that he anticipates where the ball is going. I think that's been a refreshingly super part of his game. I think that's something that I did not see a lot, but I think at senior level, it's been fantastic to see. But just 11 against 11 in a game of that magnitude against probably the best team in the world, he did everything that he could and left his heart on the pitch. And I think that's been the trumping factor for me.
All right, very fair. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so make sure to leave it in the comments on YouTube or tweet at us, leave an Instagram comment, DM, all that fun stuff, or talk about it in Discord too. It'd be a great way to think about what you thought Cole Palmer's best performance was. But we got to get into the questions, Sam. We got a lot of questions from the audience. I think the first bracket, so we had questions from Sidhan and also Orlando, just really asking about the ceiling, the realistic ceiling that we would place on Cole Palmer based upon where he is at today. There's also some thoughts on like the ideal position where we try to slot the individual in on the pitch. But I'd like to focus particularly on the ceiling part. What is he's a really, really good player for us between now and the end of the season, or he's a really, really great player of the season for us this season. What does he need to do for those two benchmarks? So the really good benchmark or the really, really great, outstanding benchmark?
Yeah, I think when we're talking about a standout strength, before we even talk about what he does well on the pitch, I would love to highlight the mental aspect of it. I think his resilience is arguably the best thing that he could hold on to at this point in time. I was reading this interview in The Guardian, and he says that, when I saw the ref give the penalty in stoppage time against Manchester City, I said, this is my time. How how many young players who are playing against, who've playing against their old club, and obviously they've left it. It would have been easier to be there, comfortable, get the occasional start, grow under one of the best managers in the world. But to come away from that in a pressure cooker situation, when the rain is basically lashing your face, you're one goal down in the death minutes, and you know that missing could be catastrophic. You feel like this is your moment to grab it. And that just, hits you how he sees the game. I think he's very, very focused. He's got incredible amount of self-assurance. And it shows in the way, I think it translates to everything he does on the ball. He's just so confident when he has it. He looks like he knows he's not going to lose it no matter what you do. So I think his resilience is just his mental fortitude is arguably his biggest strength. I know that it's not tangible. You can't measure it. You can't say that statistically this is what the number is. But I would say that based on things that I've seen, I would say that he's there. Even when talking about the penalty, he was asked like, did you feel nervous? What was the feeling like? And he said, no, not really. I don't think so. To be honest, I wasn't. I felt like I was waiting for a long time, but I did think about my club and stuff. And then after that, not really, and just went on and hit it past Edison like nothing happened. He also said that in the game against Burnley, if you remember that acrimonious clip of Sterling basically wanting the penalty and Enzo had to interfere, and basically a lot of debate around that. So Palmer basically said, on that particular day, he was not the designated penalty taker. And all he did was he looked at Sterling and Sterling said, fine. And he took the ball and he scored. So it's just that assurance that, a senior player is arguably the designated penalty taker, more established. He's also your peer, your senior peer from your old club, holds a lot of sway in the dressing room. But just look him in the eye and say, I need this, I want this. Shows a lot about his leadership, about, how he wants to play the game. And I think that's his standout strength. I think everybody knows what his standout strengths are. If you look at just his on-pitch performances. It's something that Jason Wilcox, the person I mentioned, the person who actually made sure that he was not released from the academy, he's gone from academy director to now being director of football at Southampton. And he said that, look, I'm not surprised he's done well very quickly at Chelsea. He's a quiet, languid guy, and people can misinterpret that. But you could always see elite vision, technical ability, and winning mentality. And I would perfectly agree with that and say those are the three qualities that basically, put him over any youth player that we could have signed in that position.
So how does that then establish what you think a good end of the season for Cole Palmer would be and a great season for Cole Palmer? What would they look like?
Based on his age and based on the fact that this is his first senior season, I would basically say that he needs to get 20 to 25 starts in the league and definitely get a flavor of the other competitions. I'm not going to say he needs to score double-digit goals. He needs to score these many assists or something. No, I don't think that's a fair barometer. And even though he's doing extremely well, what I would want, and I'm pretty sure Poch is going to tell him, compete. When Nkunku is back, when we've got other injured players back, make sure you're competing. Make sure you earn every single one of those 25 starts, 25, 30 starts of a 30-game season. Cement your place there, and show us what you can do. And the numbers will come. You're staying in the side because you're contributing as an attacker, which means the goals and assists are going to come. And the idea is, how can you do that? How can you make Nkunku better? How can you make somebody like a Nico Jackson better? Somebody who's also, playing in arguably his first senior season as the starting center forward for the Premier League side. So how are you making those guys better? That's the question that Pochettino needs to ask. Not how in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality. And I think a good season would be getting a very healthy number of starts and also making the kind of contributions that he has. He just needs to continue it. And a great season would be arguably with the numbers. Obviously, you look at it and say, wow, he got 10 goals. And, the kind of numbers that he was pulling at PL2 would be quite ideal for us. But I would say just getting those number of starts, being a quality player would be a great season. I wouldn't look at the numbers.
I think it's a really great shout because when you think about it, if he's earning the starts, the underlying stats are going to be good. And they're going to be what we would expect from him as a player because as Nkunku comes back healthy, as other players come into the side, Pochettino will have tough decisions to make. And if Cole is slotting himself into an undroppable position, you would have to argue, or you would assume, that these stats are in line with really, really strong performances. So I do think that is a great metric to use. And I think maybe the only other one I would add in terms of what you'd like to see from a really, really good season or a really, really great season for Cole Palmer is some level of high involvement in winning one of the cups that Chelsea are in contention for, at least this season. Again, I do think Newcastle looks pretty primed to be taken advantage of here. Again, I could be made to eat those words in about a month's time, but who knows? Maybe Chelsea advanced in the Carabao Cup, and it does feel like it's anybody's game. And Cole Palmer could be a big decider in that tournament over the next couple of matches. So I do think there's an opportunity with that type of mentality that we talked about. If he is a hero on the day in any of those cup matches, particularly leading to a final or winning a final, that would be another big intangible that he could claim as a part of the success this season.
I think silverware is obviously the benchmark at Chelsea. So from a collective perspective, I would say that responsibility has to be everybody's, from Pochettino down to everybody saying that, look, the circumstances are ripe for us to go and make a really good charge for the Carabao Cup and then get at least one trophy in the first season. And I think that's enough to basically assure that there's more time for this process. I don't want to use the word because I know people are allergic to it by now, but whatever is happening here in terms of developing the squad and making it into a CL competing, title challenging squad, you need the silverware, you need to basically show that you can compete in those high octane games. And obviously it's not just Palmer's prerogative here, but everybody else as well. But if that happens, yeah, absolutely. For him to feature and star in one of those would be the icing on the top of the cherry.
Wow, on top of the cherry, it's the leftover sprinkle that you've been, or the hot fudge that's been drizzled over the sundae.
Oh yeah.
But look, we had other questions. Ollie, Gabby, Ernsign, others, Chris, Gabriel asking, what are the things that Cole Palmer can improve on? You know, we've just spent a little bit of time talking about how good Cole Palmer is, how great he could be, just how determined he is, but he's not perfect. Yeah, he's not the perfect article yet, and he has an opportunity to grow and improve in the way that he plays. So if you're Pochettino, what are some of the things that you're circling for an opportunity for young Cole Palmer to address over those starts that he does earn?
Well, I think I wouldn't say that there's a weakness as per, but I would say that he has to improve certain execution aspects of what he's good at. Something that struck me and has been highlighted by a lot of people who watched Palmer is that his shooting and his technique is fantastic. He's a supremely good long range shooter from different angles on the right hand side or from the center. And, he can be a very good long range threat provided he's given enough ample opportunities to do it. The problem is that, he tends to take shots from I would say unoptimal distances. Like his short distance, his average shot distance this season is 25.4 yards. That's out of the box and 6 yards beyond. And he's basically got one in every four shots that he's taken on target. So it's not like he's accumulating expected goals for fun from that range, especially with the technique that he has. And I think what he needs to do is make a conscious attempt to utilize that from closer range. He has to make sure that he's taking shots in certain circumstances for sure. If, for example, there's a offensive set piece and he has the opportunity to hit something on the volley, by all means, even if you're 20 yards out, do it. But when you're in possession, when you're in settled possession, when you're getting the ball in the right spaces, has to make sure that he's taking it from better positions and he's making the most of it. But right now he's not doing that. And I think if he learns to tweak that a little bit, even if he improves it with a minuscule amount, I think we will see great returns because he's that good at shooting. So I think he has to definitely improve on that. The second point is a little related to the first because there have been opportunities in a lot of games that I've seen him play where the ideal option would be to play somebody in, but he decides to go for the shot or he decides to basically do something else. So his decision making, I would say, is above average at this point in time, especially when he's given the time and space to pick passes. But I think that his decision making process, his final product can improve. If he wants to be in the same bracket as a Cesc Fabregas and a Juan Mata, guys who we hold as the gold standard of creators at Chelsea, then that's exactly what he has to harness. He has to decide exactly when the pass needs to go and when it does not need to go, and when the shot needs to happen and when it does not need to happen. And right now, I think I can attribute it to maybe being in a new team, getting to grips with new players, what runs and everything. I can 100% factor that in. So maybe that improves with time, but I'm looking at that to sort of be a little better. And the two other aspects I would say is his weaker foot. He tends not to use it very often. With short passes, yes, touches and creating sort of like little spaces and openings for himself, okay, but no shots. Deliveries tend to be very one-footed. So I think for him to become a more complete player, absolutely. I think he needs to figure out if he can hone his right foot. There's a really good podcast that the Chelsea Spot did with Saul Saxon-Hurst, who's somebody who works as a consultant. He basically works with Premier League players. He's worked with Noni Madueke on his shooting drills, making sure that he's improving his right foot, his weaker foot with shooting. And he said, I think it's a fundamental thing. I think younger players have to improve the weaker foot as well, because you're just, why not work on something that gives you a wider range of success? I think that has to be something that he can work on. His passing with his right foot, his level of ambipedalness or ambidextrosity. He has to basically work on that. It just looks like he's he's very good at doing what he does with his left foot. I mean, no one's going to tell Arjen Robben to do the same thing with his right foot, right? But I think that when you do have the opportunity and you have a 20, 21-year old who has no ceiling, you can basically push him as high as he can go, then why not? You can definitely tell him to work on that. So I think that's something that I would earmark. And the last thing I would say is probably strength. I think he still has to get to grips with consistent, I think, level change from U23's football to senior football. I think he's a unique player in terms of, like, when you look at him, he's a winger or in a wide attacker, but he's also 6 feet 2 inches tall. He's got a very rangy frame. He's very lanky. So sometimes contact can put him off, especially from central defenders. And if he wants to play a false nine role, which I'm pretty sure he will play in certain games down the years, down the line, maybe this season, who knows. But I think if he wants to play that role, if he wants to make sure that he's going to take other aspects of his play up, like, I think he's got great box movement. We've not seen it for us because he's playing in a different role, he's playing in a different position, but I think he's got great runs inside the box. And if he wants to make the most of it, then obviously he has to be stronger when going in for challenges. So I think upping his strength will also be good. I would highly recommend seeing his goal against Sevilla if you haven't seen it in the Super Cup. Basically runs on the blind side and then heads it at the far post while shouting at Haaland to leave the ball. So good header, but static position. So those things, I think it has to do more. It has to just keep practicing, doing more. He's 6 feet 2. He's tall. Why not improve your jump? Why not improve how you can attack the box when you're not with the ball? I think those things are questions that if I'm Pochettino, I'm asking him, saying, why aren't you improving those aspects? What's holding you back?
So there were a couple other questions that merged in. I'm going to merge into a combined, which talks about the role in the side, asking, are we going to see him as a 10 or a right winger? You mentioned a little bit around the false 9 or the 10. And we also have people asking about, like, hey, we've seen the Instagram post with Nkunku looking like he's getting ready to come back. But what does that mean for when he comes back and Cole Palmer's spot? I think the only thing I would offer is that competition is absolutely the best thing possible for Christopher Nkunku, for Cole Palmer, and for all of Chelsea. And I don't think any of these decisions are in isolation, but in the thought about building the best side to attack within the Premier League. And I think there could be a lot of fluidity in who gets an opportunity to start and who plays. We know that we have players who have been out for a significant period of time, and you might have someone like Nkunku who's going to be given an opportunity to work himself back in. And there might be considerations that maybe a midfielder gets sacrificed at times to add a fourth attacker onto the pitch. And so I don't think it's as static as the moment Nkunku comes back, it's Palmer who's under jeopardy. But I do think there are people who ask that question, and they're right to ask the question about what does the makeup or how is he impacted by and when Pochettino has a full lineup of fit players available to him.
Yeah, that's a tremendously hard question to answer at this point in time. I would say that let's address the first part of the question, saying what is the long-term position, the role? Knut and teams both asked this question. So I would say that, he's a forward who basically can play across the front line. I think he can play as a left winger, which he's done for Manchester City. He can play centrally, which he's done for us in the Arsenal game, where he was moving positions. And then he can also play as the right winger, which is his natural position. Obviously, you see some aspects of his play in each position. Like, for example, his crossing, which is very good from the left-hand side, his cutbacks, which are very good from the left-hand side, even his 1v1, like how often he likes getting 1v1 with players. This is not something that you see as often on the right-hand side, where the temptation is to shift the defender's body weight to the byline and then basically cut in on your stronger foot and try to play it into the center or basically pick out a pass behind the last line. I think on the left-hand side, he's more, how can I get the ball on someone's forehead? And I think that's something that we see on one side, but not on the other. So I would say if you're looking at his long-term position, it would probably be on the right-hand side. I would keep him there. I think his natural position, his strength, or to him being perfect in that role. And it also sort of goes very well with how Reece James plays. I think when you look at Reece, very comfortable going to the byline, crossing from wide positions. Also very comfortable underlapping, hitting that edge of the box and going for cutbacks, or maybe being even further inside looking for shooting opportunities, which he does so well inside the box. And then you've got Palmer, who's very comfortable being a touchline winger. He's happy to have chalk on his boots and get the ball there and draw players out before finding spaces. But he's also very comfortable when he's drifting into the half space zones. I wouldn't want him in the center purely because I feel like when you keep a player in the number 10 position, then there's a lot of pressure to sort of like be away from the defensive midfielder. So if you're giving him that amount of freedom, the kind of freedom that Enzo Fernandez got at number 10, then yeah, I think there's definitely a case to be made. But I also think that in that 8-10 role, it doesn't suit his work out of possession, where I would say that he's a little weak when it comes to engaging in like duels. When it comes to ground duels, when it comes to aerial duels, he's still not there. When I'm talking about strength and how well he compares physically in 50-50 duels, could improve. So I wouldn't really put him in that position. Kani Chukwumeka is physically very, very good, as is Nkunku. And obviously Gallagher, you do not even talk about, because he will basically run you over. He doesn't care. So when you're looking at those three physical tanks in that position versus Palmer, who's a slightly different profile, I think a more technically dominant profile, then I would say then try to give him the assurance of being in your strongest position and work from there. So I think that's the first part of the answer. And the second, when you talk about how does the team look when Nkunku is fit, look, in a very utopian universe, Dan, I would say that a Pep Guardiola-like approach where you're rotating players and you're ensuring that the same amount of injury worries that haven't hit us don't hit us again. You look at Manchester City, and I think they have 4 injuries, Kevin De Bruyne being a major one, along with John Stones. Everybody else is fit. I don't think they've had more than 5 injuries at a time. And I think that's a big point that Pep Guardiola prioritizes. He wants to give them rest, even if his players hate it. He just wants to rotate it, involve his entire squad, make sure that everybody knows they have a role to play. A lot of players don't like it, but as a squad, it helps you. So I think in an ideal world, if you could rotate Mikhailo Mudryk, if you could rotate Raheem Sterling, and then you could figure out Palmer on the right-hand side, rotating with, say, somebody like Noni Madueke, if he becomes good enough to do so, and Nkunku, Jackson maybe finding different roles to play in the centre-forward position, then I'd say there's space for a lot of people. You've got Gallagher, you've got Kani Chukwumeka, who can play that number 10 role, that 8-10 role. So I think in an ideal world, you would like to rotate them and give everybody a chance. But like you said, if it comes to being a consistent 11, then I think hard choices will have to be made. I don't think you drop Gallagher on this run of form. On the kind of performances that he's shown consistently, I don't think you can drop him. So you can't drop Sterling also. Like, how do you drop him? So maybe Nkunku as centre forward, then what happens to Jackson? So I think those are hard questions. Those are definitely difficult questions for Poch to envision. But I would say, if you're looking at it, then it's Nkunku on the left-hand side, Palmer on the right, and you've got Jackson up front. Or you move Nkunku as the centre forward. You've got on the left-hand side Raheem Sterling and Palmer on the right-hand side. I think one of those two becomes the template. I don't know what happens if you drop Gallagher. I think it shuts the balance off. I think it throws us off in terms of our pressing, in terms of our counter-pressing, in terms of just how many balls we've won in the middle third, in the attacking third, because of him, because of his incredible tactical understanding of when to press, how aggressive to be. Losing that, I think, just takes a lot away from the collective unit. So it will be a massive headache for Pochettino. This is not an easy decision. I could give you 5 different lineups and all of them could be true. But like I said, the ideal decision would probably be to go on a game-to-game basis and figure out on which games you want to throw Mikhailo Mudryk in, which games you want to take some kind of fatigue away from Raheem Sterling. How do you want to play with a centre forward? Do you want somebody who's pinning the line back, or do you want somebody who's just dropping deep like Nkunku and then playing between lines? That's probably going to be the hardest question for me, for Pochettino, in the coming months.
Well, maybe more of a snap decision question we can answer as we round out into the last one or two questions of this episode. Ryan asking, look, when Nkunku comes back, who sticks on penalties? Like, would you give it to Nkunku? Would you allow Palmer to continue being the guy? And I feel like it's a hot hand situation, at least in my perspective, Sam. Like, right now, Cole Palmer is perfect on penalties. And so until the point that he is not perfect on penalties, knock on wood, you let him take them while he's on the pitch. But I know that there's an argument for letting other attackers get an opportunity in there, but I don't know. Let him ride.
Interesting, because I think Nkunku's penalties are slightly predictable. He tends to go to the keeper's right, bottom right, very often. I think 9 of his last 10 penalties, he's gone maybe 8 or 7 times to that position, and the only time he's gone the other side, he's missed. So if you're looking at a very unpredictable penalty taker who's basically placing it, maybe factoring in the goalkeeper's intention, reading the body language, then I would say Palmer is the better choice. But then you're looking at Nkunku because obviously you want to boost your strikers' ego, give them the kind of goal count they want. I don't think Palmer's worried too much about how many he's scoring. I think he's more obsessed about how much he's creating, which will matter more to him. But I could be wrong because he just looks like a guy who wants everything, which is fantastic for us. But that's going to be the debate. I don't think it's about who's the better penalty taker. I think Palmer is. But I think in terms of do you want to give the more senior player the rights to take it? I think it'll be Nkunku.
Ooh, all right. We'll let people also leave an answer in the comments there. We had Ricardo and Sachet asking who he is more similar to in terms of a player comp, asking about Juan Mata or Di Maria, and Poch's comments about where Palmer is, or Poch thinking that it is more Di Maria. I guess, what's your thought on a player comp for a good or great version of Cole Palmer?
Yeah, I think a great comp would obviously be Juan Mata. I don't think he's Di Maria. Obviously, both of them, in terms of body size, in terms of how they move, they look very similar. But Di Maria was different. I think he's got a lot more in terms of his 1v1 ability, his ability to burn people with speed, which I don't think Palmer necessarily relies on. He's more agile. He more relies on how Mitoma sort of takes on players. He waits for you to lose your balance and then explodes past. So I think that's something that Palmer does. Di Maria was just purely demonic at Benfica and Real. He just ran at you, and then he pulled off the kind of trivellas and passes into space. He was very, very good. It's not a bad comp at all. I think it's a great comp and does Palmer a lot of good to be compared to a player like him. And I think Juan Mata is somebody who's better, somebody who relied a lot on craft, on ingenuity, on interpretation of space, and basically like trying to find the pass at the right time. So maybe Mata is there. I also think David Silva is probably the great sort of interpretation of where he could go.
Sure.
It just the elegance with which he moves. I think Palmer's ability to basically understand where the pressure is coming from, to throw people off with feints. He's not the quickest. David Silva, you wouldn't see, winning a foot race against a defender or something like that. It was just skill and craft. And I think that's what defines Palmer very, very well. So maybe David Silva or Juan Mata would be great comparisons.
And then the last question to round it out, and this is more, again, the benefit of hindsight, from Iron Beagle asking, every article written after the end of the summer transfer window listed Palmer as one of the worst or most baffling summer transfers across the Premier League. Where would you rank it now, both in Chelsea's summer and the Premier League as a whole?
Yeah, that's a pretty great question to, I think, end the episode. I did say something about Joe Shields, but I think a good parallel for Joe Shields would be Yuni Calafat, who's Real Madrid's chief scout. And I think what Calafat has done really well is he's gone to South America and he's identified talents who might not have had enough senior experience, but he's plucked them early at 16, at 17, and said, look, come to Real Madrid at 18. We will give you the belief you need and you're going to be world beaters. And I think what Joe Shields has done with Palmer is just that. You've looked at a small sample size, a guy who's yet to make appearances in a spotlight where everybody's eyes are suddenly on you. He's gone one league down and said, the little we've seen of you, we love. I know you as a person. I know what you're going to achieve. So come here. And I think doing the business for a fee that is similar to what Real paid for Rodrigo, for for Vinicius and all those younger talents, I think it sort of like gives you a good understanding of how good that signing could be. I think it was a smart bet. I think it looked to the outsider as a very, very risky bet, but obviously to the insider, it looks like why aren't we doing this in the first place? So I think it's a very good bet to make. And it's still early days, and there will definitely be ups and downs. He's already picked up 3 yellow cards, so there will be times when maybe his discipline gets in the way and he gets suspended. There will be injuries and stuff, and it's a fact of life. But how he picks himself up over a sustained period of time is definitely going to be a definitive verdict of how good he's going to turn out to be. But on the basis of what we've seen just now, delighted. I don't think we could have picked out anybody better. Paying a 90 million for Florian Wirtz versus getting this guy for 47. I think I'm super happy. I'm super happy seeing a player of his caliber come to us and show that he's ready for the senior level and the big time.
So better best transfer, second best transfer, third best transfer that Chelsea made this window?
Ooh, wow.
I think it's super hard. I think it depends upon what you're evaluating, because Nico Jackson is now, leading or at least finding a way to add the goal volume that we were looking for. You had Nkunku, who technically joined in this window.
We haven't even seen him, so hard to rank where he sort of fits in terms of this thing. But on the basis of what we've seen, probably first or second, one of those two for sure. I think he's been, Caicedo's still sort of getting to grips with life. So, I would say he's arguably been the best signing we've made this summer.
All right. Well, that is a good way to think about it. And in Premier League as a whole, I think, that probably is a harder question to answer.
I think he would definitely figure among the best. I don't know if he would be the best. This would require sort of deeper introspection on my part. But in terms of the signings that we've seen across, I'm 100% sure he's definitely in the top 5 based on the showings that we've seen.
Better than Tonali at Newcastle?
Oh, yeah. Don't get me started. You know how much it makes me fume. It makes me absolutely fume. I remember, Dan, specifically this moment when I put out this tweet. I was at the airport going through immigration, and I was going to Europe on the 1st of September. And I basically typed out saying, even considering selling Gallagher for 45 million is the most brain dead thing you can do, at this point in the season. And people were saying 45 million, I would take that. And I said, loose change. And everybody's like, 45 million is loose change. I said, Tonali went for 60. The guy is, you could pick out 80 midfielders from League One who are better and who offer something better. So people kept piling on me. I said Gallagher's going to be better, easily better. He's going to be 80, 90 million worth. I think he's easily worth that. So yeah, absolutely. Tonali, let's not even go there. I hope he comes back stronger after his ban, and all the love to him. But not even close. I think Palmer's definitely top three,
well,
easy.
Thanks for jumping on the joke. I really appreciate it. And that probably sets the stage for Gallagher being the next episode for us to get into, because of all the praise we put on his name at the tail end of this episode. But this little fact of fiction, this little deep dive on Cole Palmer is done. It's over. Look, people loved our conversation about video games last time, so we stuck a little at the end after the credits roll on this one too for you as well. So stay tuned if that's of interest to you. But if that's not, we will see you on one of the many Chelsea-centric podcasts that will be dropping over the next couple of days to keep you occupied during the international break. But this is going to do it for this one. So until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep a blue flag flying high. So Witcher 3, Sam, last we spoke, you had put about 1 to 2 hours into it. So where are we at now? How are you in Geralt faring at the moment?
Doing pretty well, to be honest. I, like we were talking before we pressed the record button, I actually felt sick a couple of days ago. So, when I am in one of those moods where I don't want to work or can't work, then, I turned to Witcher 3 and I thought, I'm going to burn my time and not focus a lot on watching games. So I actually put in a decent amount of time by gamer standards. And and now I'm up to, the point where I can safely say that I can play the game at a decent difficulty without getting my butt handed to me on a silver platter.
All right, so not from a spoiler perspective, even though Witcher 3 is, I guess when did it release officially? It's been a while. It's been quite some time since Witcher 3 came out. But what
17.
what are you enjoying, or what are you finding that you're liking at the moment in terms of the actual game?
Well, I think I've sort of like been an obsessive fanatic for open world games. I tend to be, as a writer and a poet first. Like I love immersive experiences. So one of my favorite games, like I think mentioned on the last little sneak peek that we offered to our audiences, bonus content, was that I really loved the Elder Scrolls because just how immersive it was for me, and I was able to just lose myself in that world. Fallout New Vegas was sort of like also that game for me. I really liked it because it was post apocalyptic world, and it's something different. I think Witcher 3 also does that for me. It's sort of like set in a really lovely time in terms of like the scenery, in terms of just how different the world was. And the fun part is I visited Maribor, in Slovenia, which is one of the places where The Witcher 3 is based. So it was fun to see, the castle and the architecture being very similar to what I saw when I went there. So, poetic parallels. I think I've enjoyed the atmosphere. Obviously, the gaming elements in terms of combat and stuff are really fun too. Not stuff that I've played around with a lot, but yeah, in terms of the story, in terms of how realistic it looks, in terms of just how much detail there is, really enjoying it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and it'll be interesting to hear how that view changes over time. So I think last we spoke, I said beaten Starfield, at least, run through it and completed it once to completion. I have also beaten Spider-Man 2 for PlayStation 5. So
Whoa.
Yeah.
You are a pro, my friends.
I don't know if I would call myself a pro, though. Back in the day, I did do plenty of writing and reviews/previews about video games, so I do have at least some comfort with them. I will say Spider-Man 2 was definitely a very, very fun linear game. So I think the way that it, and also maybe like as I get ready for my move to New York City, it was a great way to get refamiliarize myself with the layout of the city, considering how good of a job they do mapping it. I do love. I think the story this time was really good. The way they integrated Miles and Peter's stories together, particularly with like the evolution of Miles as a character since he's come onto the scene, and particularly like this fact that the bridge game was the Miles Morales view, and how they allow you to interchange really well between the two Spider-Men was really well done. Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was a good game. I think people who don't love Venom or the symbiote storylines probably will not enjoy parts of the game. I thought it had a really fun take on a couple of different villains. I don't want to say too many because I don't want to spoil for people who haven't watched anything and like to be surprised. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a really good game. They did release the Video Game Awards. Top games of the year, and Spider-Man 2 did make it in that list along with a few others. I don't necessarily know if how many we will say that we have played at that point, but so the list is Baldur's Gate 3, Alan Wake 2, Spider-Man 2, Zelda, Mario Wonder, and Resident Evil 4. I have a personal opinion about playing remakes. I've heard good things about the Resident Evil 4 remake, but it's a remake, and I don't necessarily care to jump in. I have also, since beating Spider-Man 2, I've started Alan Wake 2, but I'll reserve thoughts on that until I've played more of it. I'm probably like 3 hours in, and could give much more comprehensive thoughts on Spider-Man 2. But it's been a good year for gaming. Been a really good year for gaming.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alan Wake was one of those games that I played, back in college. So I really liked it. I've been waiting for this one for a long time. So it's just a lot of my work away from football demands that I keep reading. So as a general rule of thumb, I tend to finish or try to finish a book every minimum 4 or 5 days. It's just when I start gaming a little bit and that quantity goes up, the guilt factor kicks in saying, you're not working hard enough, go back to reading. But I sort of like supplemented that by again going through the Witcher books, reading a little bit of the lore, and then immersing myself. And my brain just said, okay, that works. Go for it. So hopefully, if I can find a game that has like books written on it or has like a lot of lore that I can dive into, happy to do so and happy to go through your recommendations there as well.
All right. Well, we'll have to keep that in mind as we get into. Yeah, we record these before we actually record the actual pod, but it ends up at the back end of it. So I hope that for those who stayed and listened, they enjoyed a little bit more game talk from Sam and myself, but we'll try to get more of that in on the next pod we do together. And yeah, thanks for listening to that part of it. So we'll see you soon.